Aho, bujuin den we magen dog. Anin, kagigabo and dishinakaz. Mekanak and dudem. Mekanak wajawing and dunchaba. Beshoka kabakong inda. Ah, pichigo migwech bizendawe. And what I said there was a traditional Ojibwe protocol greeting. I said, hello, all of my relatives. My name is Kage Gabo. I'm Turtle Clan. I'm a descendant of Turtle Mountain. I live close to Minneapolis today. And I wanted to begin by thanking you all for tuning in and listening to this live Ojibwe Word of the Day. This is something I look forward to doing on Thursday nights. And whenever you take a few moments out of your day to talk about, to discuss, to listen to Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Chippewa, Nakaway, Saulteaux, language, culture, history, spirituality, linguistics, philosophy, ethics, I'm incredibly glad for that. I'm incredibly grateful for it. Thank you so much for listening. And today's word of the day, I almost felt like I had signs to speak about this particular topic. It's one I do at least once a year with you all. And, you know, it was part of a chapter of my book that I was editing this morning, as well as part of a conversation. And, you know, the conversation part was when I was asked about what I speak about. And, you know, when I thought about it, it came up in 4 points. One was that Gidinawendimin, we are all related. And in that relationship, there is interdependence and interconnection. We need one another to live, to survive, and everything we do affects one another. And that there is a way that we can live with one another. Minopamatsuin, the good life. A life of peace, a life of balance, a life without conflict with our relatives. And we know how to seek out the good life. That's a life with Sakiyatuin, with that compassionate, unconditional love for one another, with Debwewan, with truth, with Kwakwatizuin, with virtue, with righteousness, with honesty, with Dabasendizuin, with humility, with Manachiituin, with respect for one another, to acknowledge the sanctity and sacredness of each other's lives, to go easy on one another, with Zungide'ewin, with strength of heart, with courage, with bravery, and with Nibwakawin, with wisdom and intelligence. And the chapter I was editing today, it dealt with Gidinawendimin. We are all related. So I don't know if tonight's word of the day even yet is Gidinawendimin. We are all related. Or Indinawe Maganadok, all of my relatives. And let's look at both of those words. They're obviously related, no pun intended. Gidinawendimin, Inawenduak, means they are related to one another. It's a verb. It's an action. That Gidinawendimin, that is, we inclusively are related to each other, rather than the exclusive use of that verb. We exclusively are related to each other. We're speaking about everyone. We're talking about all of our relatives. Now, when this becomes a noun, it will become Indinawe Maganadok. Indinawe Magan is my relative. Indinawe Ma is I am related to him or her. Indinawe Magan is my relative. Now, when we put that edok at the end, we are addressing everyone. It's a vocative. It's a linguistic term. It means you are addressing. In this case, a group of people rather than a singular being. Indinawe Maganadok. In this way, we are speaking to all of our relatives. We are addressing all of our relatives. So, for example, if someone gets up and speaks to a room full of people and says Indinawe Maganadok, they are addressing them all as relatives. Now, in a spiritual sense, you are addressing the entire universe as relatives. And, you know, when I think about that, it's very profound. It's very deep. It's incredibly important to note that our ancestors, who knows how many thousands of years ago, through ceremony, through Gidinawendimin, through fasting, recognized that they were in relationship. That the reason they were here and that they existed was because they were related. They figured out the reason, the why. Why am I here? Because I'm related. Because I'm inextricably interconnected to all of my relatives. Because they always knew I would be here. So it was no longer why am I here, it became how. How do I live with all of my relatives? Now, the moment I realized that in the language, it really struck me. Because I think what they're trying to say here is we have this word nin, I, me, myself. Now, when you translate nin into Latin, it becomes ego. The ego is a very human condition. We can all become self-centered. We can all be egocentric. Some of us even egotistical. If it goes unchecked for too long, we can become egomaniacal, where we are just looking out for ourselves. Now, when you use a word like that in everyday conversation, when you're using it in ceremony, in prayer, what you're saying is that this I, this me, this myself, doesn't exist. I am inextricably interconnected to all of my relatives. They're inextricably interconnected to me. This idea of I, me, myself, it's an illusion. It's a myth. I am all of my relatives. You know, one of the most profound teachings I heard on that was that they would reserve that term, nin, in a spiritual sense, in a prayerful sense. That I, me, myself, that could be used by the monadu, by the spirit, by the mystery, by the creator. Only that one could say I excluding you. Human beings can't. We are all of our relatives, and all of our relatives are us. And in that interconnection, they realize that I'm not just related by DNA, I'm not just related by familial ties, by those human relationships that bind us together. I have other relationships. I am related, I have relationship to the Nabi, to the water. I have relationship to the Awasiak, to the four-legged beings. They're feeding me, they're clothing me, they're sheltering me, they're giving me life. I certainly can't live without them. I can't live without the Benishia, without the winged ones, the birds, without the Giguyag, without the swimmers, without the fish. I certainly can't live without the Mittagug, without the trees. Their branches are giving me fire, their bark is giving me a lodge. They're giving me the very oxygen I need to breathe. The asanig, the stones, we refer to them as the grandfathers. Who do we stand on when we stand on the earth? Those beings who came before us. We reserve that familial affection for. We give them that family term, my grandfather. The stones. And of course the Nabi, the water, is giving life to all of it. And he realizes, and the Anishinaabe, the indigenous person, realizes I have a relationship to each one of them. Each one becomes a relative by relationship. And the moment you realize that, you acknowledge that, you treat each one of those beings differently. You treat them as a relative rather than a resource, rather than a thing, rather than an it. They are a relative. And I think whenever we use a term like that, it should bring all of that depth with it. That spiritual knowledge that's been passed down for thousands upon thousands of years, millennia upon millennia, that you are related, that you have relationships to everyone on the earth. And on that note, I think it's important to note that we have found a way to live in peace with all of those relatives, and that is seeking out the good life. That is that life of peace and balance. That's minopamatsuan. And to think about how we act with all of our relatives, it shows us who we truly are in our relationship with them, how we treat them, how we act towards them. That in a moment of humility, dabasendazuan, we don't exalt ourselves above all of our relatives. We are all of our relatives. We acknowledge the sanctity of their lives. We have respect for them. We go easy on them. We're going easy on ourselves as well then. Saying there's no difference here. To have that kwakwadezuan, that honesty, that virtue, that righteousness, that correctness of living. Truth. To acknowledge the truth of that. One of those grandfather teachings. To speak from the heart to all of our relatives. To have this strength of heart to do it. To be a good relative. To treat them all with that unconditional, compassionate love that emerges from within all of us. And ultimately, that shows us how to act respect with great wisdom, with great intelligence. It shows us how to lead our lives properly. Our lives with balance. A balance that brings peace with it. Menopamatsuan. And so, as we're beginning this new year, this particular message that I'm trying to impart is that to remember that you do have relationships. And even if you don't intellectually acknowledge them, you're still inextricably interconnected to all of your relatives. You still are all of your relatives, and all of your relatives are you. And so, to think that if I can treat them, again, with that love, with that kindness, with that respect, with humility, with virtue, with righteousness, with honesty, to be courageous for them and with them, to have strength of heart, to speak the truth to all of your relatives. And ultimately, you lead a life of wisdom. You lead a life where you bring peace and balance to all of them. And on that note, I'm going to take a moment and say, Mi wakiro ya nongom. That's all I'm going to say this evening. I'm going to take a moment and say, thank you all so much for listening. Please feel free to like and share this video. And all of you, please do take care. And the Spirit shall decide when we see each other again.